Hey, good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar on Itential's no-code approach to integration for network automation. As a quick introduction, my name is Morgan Stern. I'm the Vice President of Automation Strategy at Itential, and I'm very excited to be joined by my friend and colleague today, Karin Munalingal, Head of Solutions Engineering at Itential.
Hey everyone, Karin here. I'm super excited to be here to discuss and showcase Itential's unique approach to data integration and transformation strategy.
Thank you, Karin. During today's webinar, we'll be exploring how to slash the network integration tax by leveraging Itential's innovations in no-code integration and its API-first approach. But before we get started, I'd like to discuss a few housekeeping points. First, everyone on the call will be muted. Second, if you have any questions along the way, please drop them in the questions panel, which you can find under the webinar. I'll do my best to answer questions along the way, and we'll cover any remaining ones at the end during the Q&A session. If we don't get to all of the questions during the webinar, we'll answer them via an email shortly after the webinar concludes. So let's get started. Before we dive into Itential's approach to automation, let's start by taking a few minutes to talk about who Itential is. Itential was created to simplify network and cloud automation at scale. To do this, we created the Itential automation platform to support a wide range of use cases, including multi-domain orchestration, end-to-end network configuration, and compliance across a wide range of networking technologies. Today, we're going to talk about how Itential's approach is enabling our customers to accelerate their automation and orchestration initiatives by slashing the time and effort associated with integration, including integration with the network, as well as systems such as IT service management, inventory systems, ticketing, and service assurance. To illustrate the complexity that many network teams are dealing with now, let's take a minute to look at a typical network change process. In today's world, network change requests can come from a number of different sources. It can come from a notification system. It can come from a service order management system like ServiceNow. It can come from an email. When an engineer gets the request, the first thing typically that they'll do is start collecting information so they can process the change. And this information can come from a lot of different sources. It can come from inventory systems like NetBox. They can go into some of the OSS systems like SolarWinds. Worst case scenario, and in too many situations still these days, it can come from an Excel spreadsheet. Once they collect the information that they need to be able to perform the change, they're going to reach out to somebody in their team or in another group to do some manual pre-checks. During this process, the team is going to make sure that the network environment and the systems that are involved in the change are in a okay state to be able to accept the change. Once they perform the pre-check, then the actual change can be deployed. And so there may be a handoff here to an engineer that's responsible for implementing the change. They may do this through CLI, or they may leverage some kind of scripting technology or similar platforms like Terraform or Ansible or Python scripts. Once the change is done, then the team needs to perform post-checks, which is similar to the pre-checks, just to make sure that the change that happened properly, that there were no unintended impacts to the network function or the network, and just to confirm that everything went as planned. Once that's done, the systems that we used to collect the information need to be updated, and additional systems need to be updated to reflect that the change was made. So that may be things like the inventory system or the Excel spreadsheet. And then finally, once the change is done, the person who received the network change request ticket needs to close the ticket. And that concludes the process. Now, given the size of organizations, this may be done by one person. This may be done by multiple people. In this example, we're kind of showing a situation where there's multiple people involved in the process. And we're also showing that there could be a large number of systems that are involved in the change. So in this case, there's, I think, 17 different systems that are interacting with the engineers to be able to provide the information and access to the data and access to the systems to be able to perform the change. For us at Itential, really our goal was to look at situations where we could enhance the business impact significantly by not only automating that center activity around deploying the script and making the change, but automating all of these processes. To do that means that whichever platform you're using has got to be able to integrate with all of these different tools so that you can effectively interact with them dynamically as opposed to having to do it manually. And when we've done this with our customers, we've seen pretty radical impact in terms of their ability to more quickly process changes and reduce the effort associated with doing those changes. So in one case, we saw a reduction in about 90% of the time to execute a change. And really the reason it wasn't 100% or closer was because there were still some points at which they wanted to have manual interaction to confirm that a particular action happened properly or things like that. So in a lot of environments, right, and folks will refer to this challenge that they have, that anytime they introduce a new technology, that they've got to pay the integration tax. So for every dollar that they spend on a new product or a new technology, they've got to spend multiple dollars, in some cases $3, $4, to be able to actually integrate that system into their environment. So to do an action like this automating from ticket creation to ticket closure, you've got to deal with some pretty significant challenges that have really, I think, impeded the ability for engineering and network operations folks to be able to interact with the network. The first challenge is, traditionally integrations are difficult. They take a lot of time. Folks need to create custom integrations to be able to talk to these various systems. Changes happen over time. And so to do these integrations, it has been a challenge. The second challenge is once you get the systems talking to each other, in a lot of cases, the languages that the systems are talking are different. And so today, you'll get a lot of tools that have REST API as their native API, which means, well, at least we can connect to each other, but it doesn't mean that we can agree on what the payload is. Another example would be like netconf and Yang. So Yang is a modeling language to describe network configuration and network activities. The challenge is that not every implementation of Yang is the same. So even though I may be able to agree that we're using the same construct, we're not necessarily using the same syntax. And so that's been a hurdle to integration. Third area is the high rate of innovation and change, right? If vendors are creating new versions, if APIs are changing, if new kinds of technologies are coming into the mix, that creates additional complexity, which really has been impacting the ability for folks to do true end-to-end automation. And one of the impacts of this is if it's historically been very time-consuming and expensive, if it takes 6 months to integrate a new thing, that means I've got to make very calculated choices because it takes a long time. The investment is high to integrate with the system. And subsequently, it's sort of constrained the way people think about what's possible. And at Itential, the primary problem that we wanted to solve was if we eliminated this integration tax, it would open up this huge vista of opportunities to do more end-to-end automation, to automate more kinds of things, which once that tax is reduced, that gives people the flexibility to be able to do more things, to have less of I would say, a hurdle around doing new use cases. And as a result, we've seen our customers start to automate for use cases that we hadn't even anticipated, because now it's possible through our capabilities. So to solve this, right, we've done really kind of focused in 3 areas. First, to simplify the integration process overall, we have changed the model to be, instead of folks needing to manually create custom software to do the integrations, we're leveraging real-time capabilities to integrate with systems and with technologies. And when we do those integrations, we're not only creating an endpoint, but we're also creating all of the relevant components and all of the objects in our automation studio, which is the place where you build automations, so that you don't have to manually create those. So when you integrate with a REST-based system, we're going to create objects for all of those API calls. which eliminates a lot of the time that you would have around creating the components that you would need to build the automation. That second thing around speaking different languages. For us, integration is really like a two-layered process. One is I need to be able to talk to the API. The second layer is I need to be able to decompose that payload and transform that data and enrich the data so that I can then create new payloads to be able to send to all of the systems that I'm interacting with. And we'll show some examples of that during the demo. Traditionally, doing data transformations was a pretty code-intensive process. People would write Python scripts or other scripts to transform those payloads. And what we've done is eliminate the coding associated with data transformation through a feature we've got called the JSON schema transformation, which Karin will show. The third thing is around this high rate of innovation and changes. And once we moved that integration activity from being a very manual development intensive process to being a software driven process, that gives folks the ability that anytime a change happens or a new technology comes in, they can quickly and easily integrate that into the platform. Let me show you real quickly what this would look like in like the real world examples, similar to the process I was showing earlier. So in any environment, a change request, a orchestration request is going to come from one of any number of sources. It could come from a service management system like ServiceNow. It could come from a CRM system like Salesforce. It could come from notifications that are either coming from things like Microsoft Teams or emails or ticketing systems. Once that change comes in to the Itential platform, the first thing that needs to happen is we need to take that payload and figure out, okay, what do I need to do here? This may trigger execution of some automations or workflows. And as part of that, I've got to take the payload request and I've got to figure out how do I transform that data into components that are going to be appropriate for all of the different parts of the network that I need to be able to interact with to complete the automation. Part of that transformation work may be what we call enrichment. In that case, I may need to talk to systems like sources of truth, such as Netbox for inventory or Infobox or IPAM for IP address management. I'm going to leverage the information that I get from my integrations with those sources of truth to augment the data that I got from the northbound systems and then basically parse that out into the components that ultimately need to then go into the network. And when we're talking to the network, because we are a multi-domain system, that network may include components like cloud components, like talking to AWS. It may include SDN controllers like NSX. And it may include things like supplemental systems like AIOps and telemetry. So talking to SolarWinds and AppDynamics, Splunk, things like that. All of these different pieces are enabled through our rapid integration capability, through our data transformation capability, and through our automation capabilities. To further help our customers in this automation process, in addition to creating the ability to generate these integrations and do data transformations, we offer what's called our Itential pre-built collection, and this is available on the Itential website. What we've done is take the most common use cases that we've encountered in the field and implemented components based on best practices. So, for example, for common systems and popular systems, we've already pre-built the integrations, and these are all open source integrations that any of our customers can use to further simplify the process of integrating the systems. So when you go to the pre-built collection site, you can search on integrations, you can grab the thing that you need. If you don't, you can auto-generate it. Same thing with transformations. There are certain data transformation activities that happen pretty frequently. And so what we've done is pre-build these things. And then for some of the automation use cases, things like upgrades, things like topology changes, things like that, we have, and SD-WAN changes as well, we've pre-built the automations so that folks can grab those. They're developed in a pretty modular fashion so people can implement them into larger automation scenarios. They can also use them as examples to kind of understand what best practices are for doing automated operations the way we've been describing. So to revisit the change that we showed earlier, the big difference here is we have moved away from being a very people-centric operation to being an automation-centric operation, which has been enabled through our automation capability. So here, the network change request will hit the IAP platform, which will trigger the execution of a workflow that will then leverage its integrations to reach out to the sources of truth. It will collect the information that it needs. It'll transform that data into the components that are necessary to implement the change. So examples of that would be, well, I need to create a command template that will actually execute the pre-checks. We'll do the analysis of those pre-checks to confirm that the system is in the state we want it to be. I may also execute an automation to do a configuration backup. Then I'll contact the system to perform the change, and this can be things like Ansible or Terraform to actually implement the change. Once the change is done, I'll take the output of that. I may do a data transformation on that then to inform the post-check activity, which then is executed automatically. And then finally, once I've got confirmation that the change was applied successfully, then I'll update the sources of truth to reflect that the change was made. Additionally, I can automate other activities associated with the change. For example, a lot of times people want to automate the ability to do rollback, or there may be some kind of triage activity that needs to happen if a pre-check or post-check fails. So that you want to build all of that logic, that engineering logic that would normally be performed by a person is going to be performed by the automation system. And the reason we can do that is because we have access to all of these different systems. So as long as we can replicate that logic of saying, hey, I need to do some quick triage. For whatever reason, the change didn't happen. I can check, well, do I have connectivity to the device? Or is there some other problem within the network? And I can check out to a service assurance system, for example. And I can start to build more and more of these scenarios into the automation so that you can be truly automated. So that by the time it's done, we can automatically close the ticket. We can inform the requester, hey, request has been completed, and we can move on to the next steps. At this point, I'm going to hand things over to Karin to demonstrate some of the capabilities that I've talked about, and then we can address questions during the Q&A phase. Karin.
Thank you, Morgan. As discussed, today's demonstration is going to be focused on, two main things. One of them is ease of integration on how Itential helps our, enterprises and all the NetOps and DevOps team members to quickly integrate into their existing ecosystem technologies. And number two is solving the challenge around data transformation. So, let's get started. All right. So, from that, so let's talk it over, right? So what we're going to do to begin the demonstration, it's going to be broken apart in two separate phases, right? The first phase is going to focus on onboarding integration without writing a single line of code. So as Morgan mentioned, how do we make this easier so more enterprises and NSPs can actually focus on leveraging their existing assets instead of focusing on consolidating everything? Let's leverage the distributed sources of truth in order to help drive automation and orchestration, right? So, and the second phase of this demonstration is going to focus on actually building a simpler end-to-end automation to reflect how Itential can integrate into things like ITSM systems and IPAM system in order to pull and gather data real time programmatically, and then incorporate and transform the data required by potentially a script or a playbook or another API that the system is providing, right? So that's exactly how the demos are going to be broken apart. So let's get started. The integrations that we're actually going to onboard today are around ITSM and IPAM. So Snow, ServiceNow, and Netbox are the two candidates that we have chosen. So on the left-hand side, we're actually within Itential Automation Platform right now. We're going to leverage the Admin Essentials application in order to do that. So as you can see on the left-hand side, we have the ability to onboard integration models, right? So from Itential's perspective, we're very focused on providing an easy way to integrate. We also have something called Adapter Builder that Morgan briefly mentioned early on that's available from our website that enables customers to bring in their open API specs to create an adapter on the fly. But this next gen version of our integration capability, which we call integrations, enables customers to bring those Swagger specs directly into the platform. And we can leverage that to dynamically create and absorb all the APIs that the vendors are providing and make those available as part of your automation creation capability. So let's get started, right? What we're going to do first is we're going to import both ServiceNow as well as Netbox Swagger specs or open API specs to make them available within the platform as all the actions and the APIs become useful for NetOps and DevOps folks to actually utilize. All right, so as you can see, I have multiple options here. We're going to go ahead and choose the integration model, right? So when I click on Browse, I have all of these Swagger specs available, but the two that we're going to choose from today is Netbox first. So let's go ahead and choose the Netbox 210 version, right? It could be any version of API that your vendors are providing, right? There's always a long list of technologies that customers are using. So, if you have vendors that have Swagger specs, it's immediately going to work. So let's go ahead and do that. And I have the ability to validate. So I'm going to go ahead and validate the Swagger spec. And then once it's validated, let's move into the import. So once it's getting imported within the platform, you will notice, we kind of showcase all of the APIs that come with this specific technology. Specific to Netbox, these are all the APIs. Once the integration model is imported, all these APIs become available as a drag and drop entity, which I'll show you next within the Automation Studio for folks to work with as they're defining these automation and orchestrated processes, right? So the second step, once we onboard the integration model, is to actually create an instance of that integration, right? So as I mentioned early on, a lot of customers actually have various different versions of the same technology that they have to keep up and running. So this enables them to be flexible and they can scale without having to say, well, this one is deprecated, to overnight I have to switch to the next version, right? So there's a lot of different scenarios where this becomes very critical and helpful. So let's go ahead and name this Netbox 210. Let's save it. And, once you kind of onboard the integration, it's going to ask us for pieces of information that are critical for connectivity purposes. So let's, it's HTTPS. I'm going to go ahead and provide all the URLs that are needed, as well as the credentials, right? So these are some of the basic information that Itential would need in order to communicate and interact with a lot of these integration points, right? So let's go ahead and fill this thing out. And from a token perspective, which is made available as a service account, I will go ahead and provide the API key that has been generated on our behalf, right? So at this point, I've provided enough information that is required for this integration to connect into Netbox, which will become useful as we start to create some of these automations. All right, so let's go ahead and save. And the second one, we're going to run through the same process to onboard the integration for ServiceNow as well. So let's go to the import wizard. Let's choose our ServiceNow Swagger spec that's available here. And we'll see how it actually shows up within our Automation Studio canvas. I'm going to go ahead and validate it, upload, and let's create the actual integration instance for it. All right, so similar to Netbox, I'm going to provide pieces of information that are required for us to instantiate a connection towards ServiceNow. All right. It's a path. All right, so there you go. I think we are done at this point. And the purpose of this was to show you, a lot of times folks have to focus on creating and writing JIAs for integrating into all of these various systems. This was an example of how most of Itential's customers can leverage and are leveraging our integration capability to rapidly onboard connectivity and usage across all the technologies that they currently use across their domains today, right? As Morgan mentioned, it is a multi-domain problem that we're trying to solve here. So as we kind of onboard newer things that become available in the cloud or in the SD-WAN space or in the enterprise space, ease of integration becomes critical. So this is how Itential is helping, the customer base as well as the market to make it easy so they can focus more on automation and orchestration. So now, as part of the phase one of the demo, now that we have onboarded these two integrations, we're going to dive into the Automation Studio application, where I'll show you how we can easily create a very simpler version of end-to-end automation in order to help integrate into different sources of truths, potentially network-facing technologies or even scripts, as well as notification system, right? It's all about how do we provide a seamless experience to the end user by leveraging programmatic interaction with all the systems that you have in your environment to help drive a lot of value with respect to automation. All right, so let's jump to that. So now we're currently in the Automation Studio application. So as Morgan mentioned, this is where the DevOps, NetOps, and CloudOps team members come in to define and design their end-to-end or even atomic level reusable automation, right? On the left-hand side, you'll notice there are several different sub-tools, such as ability to create workflows using drag and drop capability, and forms, and then pre-checks and post-check templates, and transformations for data transformation capability. So the two main applications within Automation Studio, or two main features that we're going to focus on, is workflows as well as transformations. So let's get started, right? On the left-hand side, you already are looking at several different folders that have existing pre-built automations that are also available on our website for our current customers to utilize. But in this case, as part of this demonstration, I would like to take the opportunity and actually create a brand new one so I can kind of go through the motion of what others would actually go through in order to easily create end-to-end flows, right? So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to go ahead and create a workflow here. Let's call it Gen 2, and let's call this integration demo flow. All right, so once I create that, now we're, the users will be exposed to an automation canvas that you see in the middle, and we'll be able to start leveraging the integration points that we have onboarded and the ones that were already available ahead of time through our pre-built collection, so we can start incorporating that very easily. So as you can see, there is a start and the end as part of a workflow. But as I click into any one of these nodes, or I add more and more of these nodes, on the right-hand side, you'll see all the tasks that are within the system that were dynamically generated per se, APIs or scripts that we federate or playbooks. Those become available for us to utilize to create this very easily. So let's get started, right? So for the purpose of this demonstration, the flow that I have in my mind is from an end-to-end perspective. First, we're actually going to create a CR. So when an automation gets requested, to Morgan's point early on, through various different sources, it could be a pipeline, it could be a user, it could be an Excel sheet. But as we're trying to standardize what the experience would be, the first thing I would like to do is actually create a change request within ServiceNow, leveraging the new integration that we onboarded, right? So on the right-hand side, it tells me what are some of the recent tasks that I've used. I can search for more tasks here. So I can say create change request, and then I can select one of the ones, right? So I have multiple options over here, as you can see. What I'm going to go ahead and do is select the create change request. Once I've created that request, once I've chosen that task, what you'll notice is, the Automation Studio application is intelligent enough where it understands what variables are actually required for that API to work. Right. And this becomes very critical as you start connecting into multiple different technology stacks, because they have their own set of APIs. Every function that they have their own set of variables. So instead of someone having to map that in code, we can dynamically infer that and show that as an available asset to the end user. Right. So in this case, what we're going to do is I'm going to slowly start building the flow here. So the first thing this is asking is, hey, what is the payload for you to create that change request? So I already have an existing payload that I'm going to use as part of this demonstration, but we'll see how we're actually going to be utilizing even parts of this payload as part of our data gathering plan, right? So in this case, I've provided this payload. We're actually going to create a new ticket, and we're going to name it, from a summary perspective, integration webinar demo, right? The next step that I want to do is add another node. And in this case, for the second node, for the second task, I would like to actually utilize our integration into MS Teams to create a notification. So once we create a CR, now it's time to notify folks that a network change is about to happen. So I can now look for create notification, and you'll notice there's one available for MS Teams. So when I click on it, very similar, right? It automatically understands what are the incoming variables needed for us to execute that API. So in this case, what I'm going to do is just for our initial run, I'm just going to say hello world is going to be the text. The title is going to be demo, and we're going to provide a webhook key, which could also be a variable. So everywhere where I'm providing static values, we could actually make that as an inferred variable where we could get it from different sources of truth, whether it's a form, whether it's another API, whether it's another end system that drops some events in message buses, right? So let me fetch the webhook key for MS Teams, and I'm going to drop that in here. All right. And I think we're done at this point, right? So the next thing that I wanted to do is actually go to the source of truth from an IPAM perspective. So I'm done creating the change request. I'm done adding a task for notification. Now I need to go to Netbox to actually pull an IP address that I would like to use as part of my interface creation. So let's go ahead and add that. So I'm going to add yet another node, and let's look for get IPAM prefixes available IPs. So what this particular API will do is go to Netbox in real time and fetch all the available IPs. And I'll show you in the later part of the demonstration how we're going to utilize data transformation to actually pull the specific IP that we need, right? So it all comes together towards the end in conjunction with integration plus data transformation. So for right now, let's statically set this value to 65 because that's a known prefix that I've used before. And the final task over here is going to be us adding a non-API element, right? So a lot of customers have existing scripts or playbooks. So what I'm going to look for is NetMiko, because one of our team members have actually created a Python script that goes and creates an interface in the network. So in conjunction with all the APIs made available through integration, we're also going to be able to incorporate a script written by somebody in the organization. So as you can see, as a non-developer myself, I don't have to know how to write Python, but I'm shown here that there are 4 pieces of information required for us to execute this script. So in this case, I'm just going to go ahead and statically provide those. And then later on in the demonstration, I'll show you how we're going to programmatically provide values to these fields instead of someone having to fill this out manually, right? Test, and then we'll go to IP, right? And then for the net mask. All right. So at this point, I have created my, a simple automation that leverages the integrations that we onboarded, specifically ServiceNow as well as Netbox. But in the same breath, we're able to leverage some of the other pre-built integrations and pre-built assets that we have onboarded within the platform. So at this point, I'm ready to actually execute this automation with all the static values, and we'll see what the results are. It's important because once we get the responses back from these technologies or from these systems, we're actually going to, in real time, create a data transformation. So as Morgan mentioned, JST, using our JST designer to create the data transformation to pull specific values from ServiceNow, from Netbox, and then actually provide that to the script, right? So let's first things first, let's go ahead and kick off this automation and see what that looks like within our operations board over here. So as you can see, the automation is kind of moving through the motion. It went by really fast. I'm going to quickly zoom in and kind of show you all the tasks that we actually put on the canvas. The first one was to actually create a change request within ServiceNow, right? This was an API that was invoked. you'll notice on the right-hand side, we audit and keep all the task data, right? So what was the incoming? And this is something that we actually sent to the API, and this was the outgoing, right? This is a result that actually we got back from ServiceNow. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to use this result and pinpoint and pick values like ID, number, and summary, so we can utilize to create a notification, as well as we're going to use it as part of our description when we're creating a brand new interface on a network device, right? Similarly, as I kind of scroll down, we successfully created a notification. We also captured data about that. And last thing I wanted to quickly showcase is this was an API towards Netbox, right? So if you look at the task data, this was the incoming parameter that we had provided, which was 65 statically. And this was the results that we got back, right? It's a list of IPs that are available that we can utilize when we create a brand new interface in the network, right? So this basically goes to show that how we were able to quickly incorporate the integration, use the API, and create an automation rapidly without having to write any code, right? That's the first part. Actually, the second part of our demonstration is incorporating the integration. Now, finally, what we're going to do is, as you remembered within the Automation Studio, I'm going to quickly go back here. We statically provided all the values for the inputs. So the next challenge is when Morgan kind of showed that slide around, hey, how do we programmatically utilize our API integration and automate across these tool sets? This is what we're going to show next, right? I'm actually going to utilize things like data transformation to derive values that I need, and I'm going to pass it to all the subsequent tasks later. So let's get started. I have all the information I need from the change request from ServiceNow. I have all the information that I need from Netbox. So what we're going to do is, in the middle, I'm actually going to go ahead and add a JST right here. We're going to add a node, and we're going to call our transformation task, right? So transformation task is something that's inherently available within the platform that will invoke a JST that we're going to design in real time, right? So let's go ahead and save this automation. It's saved here, perfect. And what we're going to do now is on the left-hand side, as you notice, there's a transformation tab, right? So I'm going to open that up. These are all the available transformation. We also have pre-built transformations that customers can use. But for the purpose of this demonstration, because we have a specific use case here, I'm actually going to create a brand new one. So let's go ahead and get started with that. So let's pick the transformation. Let's call this. Let's create, and kind of opens up this wizard, right? So this is our JST designer. This is where our customers have the ability to utilize a no-code platform in order to define their data transformation strategy. So as you can notice, within the canvas, we have incoming schemas, outgoing schemas that we can define. So what we're going to do is, because we know we have two sources of truth here, one of them is, the response that we got back from ServiceNow. So let's go ahead and choose that, right? I'm going to go ahead and quickly pick ServiceNow here. And we're going to copy this response, and we're going to paste that here within the designer, right? When I add a new schema, you'll notice we're shown this particular view, right? So on the right-hand side, I can actually paste the schema and get rid of things that we actually don't need when we're going to pull values out of. So this was a response that we actually got back from Snow. What we're going to do is infer the schema, and it automatically creates a schema for you, right? So you don't have to be aware, or you don't have to know how to manually create that. Once you have a JSON block, this application enables you to infer the schema. So let's call this Snow CR payload. Now let's save this. So now it's become available as an incoming schema, and we'll show you how we're going to utilize it going forward. Right. The other incoming schema that I'm going to add is from Netbox, right? So if I go back to Operations Manager, I'm going to quickly click on the third task that we have right here, which resulted in us getting a response back that had all the IP addresses available as part of that prefix. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this response. I'm going to go back to our designer and add that here on the right. And we're going to do the same action. We're going to remove things that we don't need. and I'm going to infer the schema, and let's call this netbox available IPs. And let's save it. Right, so now we have both of these incoming schemas. Now we need to figure out what is needed for the automation to move forward, right? So there are three basic things that were needed within the flow. So as part of the script, I'm going to quickly go back here. As part of the script, we actually needed the IP address that comes from a netbox, and we need the description that we're actually going to generate on the fly here, right? So let's go back to the JST designer. First things first, I'm going to open up the Snow payload. I'm going to say these are the three pieces of information that I'm going to utilize in the future. So it's very easy for me to drag and drop and actually create something like this, where you're not writing any pieces of code. You're basically just saying, I want the value of the ID that came back from ServiceNow so I can utilize it in the future within my automation. So let's call that change ID. Save it. I'm going to do the same thing with the change number. Very straightforward. And the same thing with the summary, right? The summary was provided, although internally within the payload, but it could be coming from a different source. So we're just going to call this change summary. Perfect. So one of the other tasks as part of the demonstration we wanted to do is, how do we actually create a standardized description for our interfaces? A lot of times people can put whatever they want in the network, but what we're going to try and do is actually merge the change number that we have and the summary together, so it's like a cohesive thing that we're going to associate with the interface being changed in the network. So how do we do that? On the right-hand side, you'll notice there's a lot of methods available, right? These are drag and drop things that I can utilize as part of my data transformation strategy. So the one for this demonstration I'm going to use is template literal, right? What this enables me to do is define what I want to for the payload to return. So I can go in here and define a variable. Let's call this change ID. And then I want the change ID to have a hyphen after it and whatever the summary is. So let's call this summary. So as soon as I do that, right, this is the standard that I want to utilize within my organization. So every interface that gets created will have a description of change ID from Snow and the summary that someone provided, right? So that way we can keep track of it back and forth. So let's update. So as soon as I did that, you'll notice now it's needing two pieces of information. Because we can already pull that from the payload here very easily, I can use a change number and provide that here, and I can use a summary and provide that here. And the output of this would be another outgoing value that we can utilize. And let's call this interface description. Call this string and save. So now I can go from string to string over here. So now we have majority of the pieces that we need. And the final thing that we would need from ServiceNow is the ID, right? Because we're also trying to create a link that we're going to put in notification within MS Teams. I would like to actually drop another template literal here that we're going to utilize. And what I'm going to do is there is a URL that we can use as part of this. And paste that in here, and you'll notice there is an ID available, right? So this is basically the URL, and ID is a variable. So when I update it, I'm actually going to get the ID from the change ID. And the string, we're actually going to pipe that as an outgoing schema, and we're going to call this Snow link. And this is also going to be a string. All right, so I think we have everything that we need from Snow, where we captured, the description for the interfaces, the change ID, the change number, as well as the Snow link. Let's focus on Netbox. So now that we have the IP addresses, very often when you get a payload like we previously saw as a JSON response, someone has to write some code in Python to pull the specific things that they need. What I'm going to show you next is basically how do we do that without writing a single line of code. So now that we have that response available from Netbox, what I'm going to do is utilize our query capability within JST to quickly pull out information that we actually need, right? So I'm going to provide an object here. So the incoming for this specific query will be the response that we got back from Netbox. And I'm going to provide the query over here. And the query would be response 0.address. And what I'm trying to do is pull a specific address. And the next thing that I will have to do is I'm going to quickly flip back here. You'll notice the address actually has the subnet associated, but we only need the IP for the script as a requirement. So I'm going to go back here, it's down, and I'm actually going to add a split function here that's available, right? So I can split a string whenever is needed. So I'm just going to draw it from here to here, and the parameter that we're going to split on is there. And this should create an array of 2 elements, right? The IP address and the net mask. So the next thing I'm going to use is this get index. So at the first index would be my value for the IP address. So I'm actually just going to add that here. And the output of this, index 0, and the output of this would be the network IP that we actually need. So let's call it net IP, and we'll call it a string. So once I save it, I can output that here. So what we have done is we have basically taken the output coming back from Netbox without writing a single line of code. We're able to query, manipulate, and pull out the specific IP needed for the script. So I'm going to go ahead and save it. What's great about this is now I can run it in real time just to test. So when I click run, this is a payload that we're going to pass. As you can notice, we can validate incoming, revert to values. I'm going to not validate this time around because we have a lot of nulls. As you can notice at the bottom, these were the outputs that we're looking for. So it successfully was able to pull out the change ID, the change number, we created the summary, and the net IP. So now that we have our transformation created, leveraging different sources of truth and all the data that we actually captured from them, we're going to go back to the Automation Studio. I'm going to make a few changes here, right? So as part of this flow here, there's a JST. So I'm actually going to look for that JST. The name is Webinar Demo Transformation. So let's look for that. All right. So as soon as I choose it, you'll notice it's going to ask for 2 pieces of information. Right. This is before the net box. What I'm going to do is let's go ahead and delete this right now. Delete the transition. We're going to move this up here. What I'm going to do is create the notification at the end, right? So these are rapid changes that I can make. So once I go here, we're going to get information from Netbox, ServiceNow, at transition here. We're going to get information from Netbox. I'm actually going to add a new node here. And this is going to be our JST. Right after the JST, I'm going to add another transition to the script. And then right after that, just to get a little bit creative, I'm also going to include another child automation, one of the pre-built automation. So let's go ahead and add that here too while we're at it. So, and the final piece is a create notification. So let's go ahead and add transitions where needed. The final one, connect to N. Perfect. All right. So the middle piece is going to be our JST. So I'm going to look for a transformation. Let's quickly look for the webinar demo transformation here. And for the JST variables, what I'm going to say is for Netbox, I'm going to get it from the tasks that we actually invoked towards Netbox. That's great. So now we have it. For the second parameter, I'm going to get it from the task that we executed towards ServiceNow. So now I have the 2 pieces of information. Let's save it. So within the script, as you notice, these were static. Interface name, we're going to leave it as is. Description, instead of being test, I'm actually going to pull this from the transformation, and let's call this interface description that we actually created. IP address, I'm actually also going to pull from the JSON transformation, and it should say the network IP. There you go. And the net mask could be static, right? So go ahead and save that again. And for this node, I'm actually going to pick out a child automation that we can include. So this is one of the pre-builts that is already available. So as part of a modular automation, I'm going to look for ServiceNow, and there should be an automation that enables me to update and close the CR, right? And when I pick that, it automatically understands what is required. So in this case, because we also pulled a change ID as part of our transformation, I'm going to choose the JSON transformation here. And as you can see, this is a change ID, right? And the final piece for the notification, it used to say hello world, which was static. I'm going to go ahead and actually pull this from the JST as well. And we're going to call this the change summary. Nope, sorry. This is actually going to be the snow link. And then the title is going to be the change summary, right? So as you can see, I'm basically stitching things together, leveraging our integration and JST capability. And this would be our change summary right here. All right, so I think we're good at this point. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and save it. The additions that we made to our previous flow, which was just set of tasks and API. In this case, we have added a data transformation. We have added a child automation that's going to close the ticket. And finally, we're going to update all the other things programmatically. So let's go ahead and kick this thing off and start it here. Let's take a look at how the automation flows. So as you can notice, it has started flowing through. Right now, it's updating snow. And what we're going to take a look at is the first things first. It's actually doing the same set of tasks. So it's actually getting the output data. But more importantly, when I go into the JST, you'll notice these were all the outputs, right? So we're actually creating that on the fly, and we're using that as part of the script. So if I go back to the script execution, and if I go into the task data, you will notice, the incoming variables. Previously, the description was hard-coded, and now it actually got that from the data that we transform, right? So as you can see, finally, once the automation ran through, I'm going to quickly show MS Teams. Before, it was just a hello world, but now it actually shows a proper notification, right? This is what we started off with, and this is what we ended with. So, going back to the operations manager, I'm going to pause here. And so this was the end of the demonstration that shows how customers can rapidly leverage the integrations that they can onboard, but also very easily create automations to scale across multiple domains. So I'm going to hand this back to Morgan again. Thanks, Morgan.
Very cool, Karan. That's great. I think one of the things that kind of blows me away every time I see this is I think of what it would take to do this with using other methods or tools. And what I've come to appreciate is that in a lot of other situations, what Karan just did in the last 30 minutes or so would probably take weeks or months to get done. So really good demonstration of the capabilities of the platform and really shows how the things I talked about earlier actually happen. So real quickly, as we're wrapping up, I'm going to answer a question or two momentarily. So we've shown you a couple of different things. I just wanted to talk real quickly about the components that were used as part of this demonstration. Itential automation platform in the center, that's the low-code automation platform for doing the creation of the flows that Karan showed you and execution of the automations. Automation Gateway is a application that we use to access script assets, things like Ansible, Terraform, Python scripts, and to be able to interact with the network in this example, so the NetMiko components. And then the pre-built collection is that combination of adapters and integrations and transformations that we provide on our open source site for our customers. So in closing, why people are working with us, the big reason we've been talking about today is around flexibility. What you saw as a byproduct of that was implementation speed, that our customers are able to much more quickly move from concept to production as compared to other methods. And then one of the things we didn't talk about too much today, but is really one of the things that we've seen become more important for our customers is the ability to scale. They want to be able to move from being able to execute tens or hundreds of activities to thousands, tens of thousands, millions, and now billions. So with one customer alone, last year we did well in excess of 1 billion automated transactions. Across all of our customers, we're looking at around 5 billion transactions. And so we've demonstrated that this easy-to-use platform can also work at scale. So we have a couple minutes left. If you have any remaining questions, please type them in. But Karin, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions that have already come in. For people who don't have like Swagger documents or open API specs, how can they integrate with those systems with the Itential platform?
Yeah, that's a good question, Morgan. So from our perspective, right, even though we kind of trend towards leveraging an open API specs and Swagger, there are tools available today. So if you have SOAP services, if you have Postman collections, Itential does actually support incorporating a Postman collection and creating an adapter using the adapter builder. At the same time, if you have SOAP services, there are other tools out there like API-matic that help you convert those SOAP services into Swagger specs. Right. And because we can easily consume these Swagger specs and dynamically generate, a lot of our customers have already been doing that for the past 2.5, 3 years.
Cool. Thank you. The other question that came in for transformations are transformations used like as specific to a workflow, or is that something that could be used by multiple workflows?
No, it's a reusable asset. And I'm glad someone asked that question. Is anytime you create a transformation that sits across, one system to the other, that now becomes a reusable asset, right? You have to remember you're defining, data structures from an input and output schema. So you could now use that same transformation that we built as part of this demonstration across multiple different flows in a standardized fashion. The only thing that changes is the data, because the structure and the transformations actually remain the same. So it's built to scale with reusability and modularity in mind.
Great. Thank you. Okay, folks, we're going to be wrapping up. Before we close, I wanted to let everybody know that we've got recently provided the ability for folks to get a test drive of the Itential platform. It's free to get started. You can start to use the platform and really start to learn how you can leverage the Itential platform to solve some of your use cases. The URL is provided below. So in wrapping, I want to thank everybody for participating in today's webinar. I hope we were able to give you a better understanding of how Itential's no-code approach to integration and transformation can help you to slash that integration tax. And please be sure to reach out to our team if you have questions after the session. Thank you for attending this and have a great day.
Thank you.